This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.
Oh, greetings, Bucketheads. Mavar Tagar. Welcome to another Bantha Tracks bonus episode of the podcast. We are here for another episode of Mando Vision After Dark. For an episode that we are basically going to refer to as our Acolyte Episode 7 pregame show. But again, it's also Mando Vision After Dark, which means that much like Judas Priest, we are living after midnight. So, this is the Mando Vision Podcast, and I am your host, Narguy Tom. Thank you so much for checking out this small independent Star Wars podcast. So glad that you're here. Reach out to us on the socials. We're at Mando_Vision on Twitter and Instagram. You can email the show at mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share the show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. All right, Bucketheads, we're here for a very specific purpose today. Something from the last episode of The Acolyte that I have not really been able to get past. I wanted to get together with you guys, discuss it before episode 7 of the Acolyte, so that when we do our discussion for episode 7, I don't have to waste a lot of time rehashing this particular element of episode 6. I want to have this conversation with you guys now. I mentioned it a little bit on our last episode for the Acolyte, but I want to get a little bit more in depth with you here and kind of share the reasons why this one particular element of the storyline is bugging me. Now, I want to mention straight up, right off the bat, this story choice that they've made with the show has not derailed my enjoyment of the show, has not detracted from my enjoyment of the show. I still liked the episode last week, but again, I still had my criticisms of it. So we're sort of getting more into that particular aspect of it. But again, this doesn't taint my opinion of the show thus far. Now, if they completely botch it in the next 2 episodes, I will be here to discuss that with you all. But in the meantime, this is just something that is sticking in my craw. And I wanted to have the conversation with the awesome, supportive people in Buckethead Nation ahead of tonight's episode 7. So we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about this thing that's bugging me. And maybe you agree, and maybe you don't, and that's okay. Whether you are on with me on this, or as Anakin would say, against me on this. It's okay. This is what the show's here for. We're here to have these conversations in a civil fashion where we respect each other's opinions and we listen to each other's opinions and we have a wonderful discourse. And we just go about liking Star Wars in our own special ways. So we're going to have this conversation, but we have to do something first. You know what time it is. Strap on your buckets. Let's go.
This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.
So, last week, when we had our discussion for episode 6 of The Acolyte, I mentioned how much I did enjoy the Chimere, I don't know, I'm never going to say his name right, friends, an OSHA story that takes place on the planet that's definitely not Octo, at least not until it is Octo. TBD, we'll see what happens with that. I enjoyed that aspect of the story, even though I felt like it lacked some forward momentum as far as the characters like accomplishing things. I enjoyed the back and forth between the two characters. I feel like they sort of advanced their own stories minimally, but somewhat significantly, at least as far as as it relates to the stranger sort of unlocking OSHA's anger or resentment towards the Jedi. But the other side of the story, the parent trapping of Master Soul with May on the ship that just mysteriously breaks down, so there is no pursuit of Osha and the Sith Stranger. We're just sort of stationary with these characters. I had some problems with that one, and I want to talk about one particular aspect of that element of the story that bothered me the most. And I alluded to it as a possibility when I made the joke after episode 5 about the parent trapping of Master Soul. And I made that joke because in my mind, it seemed impossible to me that Master Soul could be deceived, and that Osha could just walk her way aboard the ship, and Soul not have any knowledge of this, not be aware of this happening. But that seemed to be exactly what we got when it came to episode 6, was that May just walked on board the ship. Soul easily mistook her for Osha, and went about treating her as he would have Osha, his former Padawan. Now, why this bothers me is rooted firmly, in my opinion, in George Lucas's Star Wars lore, and that relates to the abilities of the Jedi and the way that the Jedi perceive each other in the Force. As Yoda tells Luke in The Empire Strikes Back, luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. And then more importantly, as astute listeners of this podcast may know, we are doing a Star Wars: The Clone Wars rewatch. And one of the lines that has stayed with me in the course of our rewatch goes all the way back to the first episode of season 1, a particularly standout episode in my opinion, because as a lot of you listeners know, over the years I have developed a massive affinity for the clones and their plight as basically a slave army for the Republic. But that first episode, it's a clone soldiers teamed up with Master Yoda on what seems to be a routine mission, but they end up going up against Ventress and the Separatists and droids, and it's a whole thing. And there's battles and death and all these different things, and the tide seems to be turning against Yoda and the clones. So they're holed up in a cave, and Master Yoda is literally rallying the troops. He's getting their morale up. He's boosting them. And there's a moment where he sits down with the clones, and he has them remove their helmets. And one of the clones says, "Not much to see here, sir. We're all basically the same." And Yoda's response is so very, very important. It says, Yoda says, quote, "In the Force, very different, each one of you are." That is significant, because genetically identical the clones are. Visually, they are mostly identical, like distinguishing features, tattoos, different facial hair, haircuts, those kind of things, to sort of separate themselves. But again, they're still the clones. They look the same, but they are genetically identical. Yet each of them, like a snowflake, is a unique signature within the Force. This is an important line for what I want to talk about, because the deception that Master Soul has committed against him by May, to me, seems outlandish. As a fan of the Star Wars The Expanded Universe, we have seen Force powers swing wildly from one end of the spectrum to the other, so much so that, like, for example, Dave Wolverton in The Courtship of Princess Leia had a scene where Luke Skywalker basically floats to the ground after his X-Wing has blown up. This seems like an egregious abuse of what we know Force powers to be nowadays. Now, at the time, it seemed outlandish, but we didn't have a frame of reference. We had 3 movies, and Luke barely knew how to use the Force at all. By the time of the prequels, we at least get a better understanding of it, and we have a little bit more clarity. One of the reasons why Yoda's dialogue with those clone soldiers is so important to me is because it's from Lucas himself. Lucas, very much involved in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, very much involved with Master Yoda being the wise force master that he is. So when Yoda says these things, they have a certain weight to them. They have a gravitas. And I think it's important that we remember that in context to the May and Osha situation. Because I don't buy that Soul had no clue that it was May and not Osha. That chafes me to the nth degree. And it is something I've had a hard time getting past in the week since that episode debuted. Now, again, that storyline was my least favorite in episode 6. I didn't care for the lack of forward momentum with that at all. I didn't care for the fact that Soul didn't seem to figure out he was with May until he realized that she didn't reattach the correct body to her pip droid. And that bothers me. That rankled me a little bit. I was sort of like, really, Soul? Your own former Padawan, you can't distinguish in the Force better than this? And it sort of rubbed me the wrong way. And then you have the visual element. Again, it's the same actress, and they do the trick with the hair, but May has a little tattoo on the side of her forehead, and again, her braids cover it up, but, I mean, come on. That's what we're going to go with. That's what we're looking at here. Now, again, they can course correct this pretty easily in the next episode. And also has to say something along the lines of, hey, you didn't pull the wool over my eyes. I knew it all along. I brought you on board. I wanted you here. We needed to have this conversation. This was important. And I'll shut up. I will shut up and just go along with the rest of the story. I'm not one of these people that's going to like cling on to this as like my excuse to hate the show and review bomb it negatively. No. I'm enjoying the show. By and large, I enjoyed the last episode. This is just one of those little nitpicks that I'm having a hard time getting over, and I wanted to have the conversation with the wonderful people of Buckethead Nation so that you can tell me if I'm a cuckoo bird or not. Yes, I probably am a cuckoo bird, but hear me out. I just want you to hear me out. That's all I'm saying. And again, maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Maybe they address this with one line of dialogue in the episode that we're going to see later tonight, and then I'll just shut up about it. But yeah, it rubbed me the wrong way. The parent trapping of Soul and him having no clue that May and Osha, like he just goes along with it. Like, is he so distracted from what happened with the Sith Stranger on Kofar that he can't be bothered to probe the Force a little bit more carefully around his former Padawan? Like this is one of those things. Again, as I made an example of with the courtship of Princess Leia, the wild swings of Force abilities, the inconsistency of Force abilities was a big problem in the old expanded universe. I feel like they've done a better job recently, kind of keeping people's Force powers in check. But I mean, what did we learn in the original trilogy? I mean, people sensing each other's presences in the Force. Vader sensing Luke, Luke sensing Vader. All these different things. You know, Leia sensing Luke on Bespin. It's not like telepathy. You know, it's not like a mental call. Like Leia, it's Luke. I'm over here. Come get me. I'm hanging off this thing in Bespin. It is, as Yoda said, beings in the Force are very distinguishable. Their presences are unique signatures, like fingerprints. It's like snowflakes. So whether they're genetically identical or not, it doesn't matter. It doesn't change. And again, I adhere to this because this is something that Lucas put out there. This is from the maker himself. And so the fact that this was sort of ignored for what for what appears to be plot convenience bothers me. It gets under my skin a little bit. And again, they can fix this with one line of dialogue, even a throwaway piece of dialogue in the episode that we're going to see in 18 hours from now. And maybe they will, maybe they won't. And maybe, or maybe it's just one of those things I'm going to have to accept and live with and move on from. But it is to me, it is a little bit of a flaw in the story that they're telling here. And again, I've had some issues with some of the pacing, some of the back and forth with some of the characters. For some reason, this one seems to be sticking in my brain the most. as sort of like the big swing that I really wish they hadn't taken. And again, we'll judge the series as a whole after it completes, after it wraps up. And maybe this is just a small little bump in the road. And it probably is. I'm probably making mountains out of molehills here. But I just wish we had a little bit more consistency with our force powers and our force, the beliefs of our characters. Again, Master Soul seems to be a flawed but heart in the right place kind of character. And we'll see if that sticks after episode 7. So the fact that he couldn't distinguish the fact that May had subbed in for Osha and was parent trapping him really bums me out, really bothers me. And we'll see where it goes from there. But again, the words of Master Yoda loom large in my mind when it comes to this episode and this particular moment of the episode. In the Force, very different each one of you are. That must apply to May and Osha as well. I don't care if there's some sort of Force dyad or whatever. It shouldn't matter. They are, again, like fingerprints, like snowflakes. They are unique beings in the Force. And that's all I'm going to say about it. And we'll see what happens. We'll see where we go from here. Do they resolve this issue with one line of dialogue? Do we gloss over it? Am I making mountains out of molehills? Again, one of the reasons why we're having this conversation now on Mandovision bonus show is so that I don't have to waste time on tomorrow night's episode having it with you then. So I appreciate you all sitting around and hearing me out. Thank you for being here for our bonus episode, Mandovision After Dark, Living After Midnight, the Acolyte episode 7 pregame show, whatever you want to call it. I appreciate you all being here. This is the Mandovision podcast, and I'm your host, Nargai Tom. Thank you for checking out our small independent Star Wars podcast. Reach out to me on the socials. I'm at Mando_Vision on Twitter and Instagram. Email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share this show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. And if you can, 5-star reviews. So insanely helpful to the small podcasts like us. All right, Bucketheads, go out there. Be great Star Wars fans. Have a conversation. Have the nice discourse. Again, we don't all have to like the same things. But, you know what? That was something I was going to bring up. I don't even know if I should go down this road now. But I'm not. You know what? I'm not. I'm not going to do it. We're not going to go down that road. No. Go out there, be great Star Wars fans. Support each other, listen to each other's divergent opinions, and have the conversations, but respect each other, because that's what we're here to do. That's what this podcast is all about. Let's have the conversations. We don't always have to agree, but and when we don't, we respect each other's opinions, and that's what it's all about, my friends. All right, we'll be back later tonight to talk about Episode 7 of The Acolyte. I can't wait. I'll see you all then. And in the meantime, remember, this podcast, it can only end one way. This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.